Alright folks, settle in. Today we're going to discuss something a little different, but hopefully you'll still walk away being a little wiser about the world. We've been over the ins and outs about the gods that exist in our universe, their power, who they answer to, and what motivates them. But sometimes certain deities don't always fit that niche and can't be lumped together with all the rest, perhaps because they didn't even start out as a god at all. And sometimes they behave in a way that's completely foreign to what we'd expect. And sometimes they'll just walk away from everything. But what exactly does that entail? That's what we'll be discussing today. What does it even mean to walk away from your worshippers? Hopefully we can come to some kind of consensus. So let's get right into it. Alright, at this point, I guess I should introduce our main character. This here is the god known as Ubtao. Although you might know him by a different name, he has many after all, and rightfully so. He was, or perhaps is, a very busy entity. Ubtao is the creator of the entire Chultan Peninsula. He's the Father of Dinosaurs and the builder of the city of Mezro. But before we can understand why he left, we need to understand exactly what it is that he built. So let's go on a little trip. Okay guys, let's turn our attention southwards, past the land of and even further south than Kalimshan, to an area known as Chult. Have you been there? It's unlikely, but perhaps some of you have. But for those who haven't, Chult is located at the westernmost end of the Chultan Peninsula, in the southernmost part of the trackless sea. This land has always been remote and isolated, as a result of its tall mountains and dense jungles full of savage beasts and diseases. And yes, even dinosaurs. And yet, it remains to this day a land of great riches that call to adventurers, just like yourselves. It's a beautiful and deadly land sequestered from most of the civilized world as we know it. And the reason for that, at least in part, is because the land was actually created separately from the lands that you and I occupy. Okay, so Ubtao began, perhaps surprisingly, as a primordial. During the Blue Age, when this world was still new, the gods and primordials fought for dominance, a battle for supremacy known as the Dawn War. We've covered this in a few other entries, so seek them out if you're interested. But this age came to a sudden stop when a being known as Dendar the Night Serpent, another primordial, rose up and devoured the sun in the sky, plunging this world into darkness and freezing temperatures. Due to this, it seemed as though the primordials would win this millennia-long war, until one of their own turned their back on their own kind and deceived them, one and all. This was Ubtao. And this is why he's commonly known as the Deceiver among his other names. Dendar was subsequently banished to, we believe, the realm of the dead, which is accessed behind a massive iron door located beneath the Peaks of Flame in Chult. And afterwards, Ubtao would come to an agreement with the other gods. He would guard the door under the peaks, waiting for the day when Dendar would attempt to enter the world once more. And through this agreement, Ubtao would be granted the land that would come to be known as Chult, to shape and mold it as he saw fit. The gods would also go on to create an entirely new sun, ushering in the Days of Thunder. And as a result, Ubtao would shape everything within Chult. He filled the jungles with all the lifeforms we know today, and hell, even shaped the land itself. And yes, he would, through his will, create the dinosaurs that roam that very same land. Most of the time, gods tend to be distant to people like us, existing on entirely different planes, dictating their will from afar. But Ubtao was actually a very present god. He would even walk among his people. And when he showed his avatar to his flock, he would appear in the form of a powerful tabaxi male with dark brown skin, short black hair, and a distant look in his eyes. Eyes that saw more than you and I could ever imagine. He'd also take the shape of a massive dinosaur from time to time, which personally I think is just great. Basically living the dream of every young kid, including myself. But Ubtao would create more than just the land and the jungles. He'd also personally shape the capital city of Mezro, which would go on to be the largest civilized population center in Chult, and a holy place for the Tabaxi people. It's clear to me that Ubtao cared deeply for his subjects, who were essentially a reflection of his divine will, and he would go on to serve them through his divine guardianship. But I've already told you how this story ends, haven't I? Why would Ubtao up and leave his creations? What kind of god would abandon what he clearly loves? Well, to back up a little, what exactly does Ubtao stand for? He's known to be a stoic, lawful entity that promoted wisdom among his people, and his symbol is that of a circular maze, which I'll show you here. The idea, at least as far as I can tell, is Ubtao believes that life in and of itself is a maze of sorts. Each person's life would be a different maze that one has to navigate. There are many, many avenues you can take, but at least to Ubtao's mind, there's only one true path. I am paraphrasing, of course. I could talk for an hour about what I believe he believed, but to make a long story short, I think Ubtao wanted the Chultans, his children, to find their own path in life. Essentially, instead of deities that would tend to give their worshippers constant direction whenever they asked, Ubtao would allow them the freedom to forge their own path. Forging their own path just as Ubtao forged his own path when he created the entire Chultan landmass. Basically, the idea that divine guidance should not, in the end, become divine control. Now, that's not to say he didn't believe in helping his people, quite the opposite actually. It's said that Ubtao was very present in the lives of his worshippers, at least in the early days. But most of his prescriptions would be in the form of deep wisdom and the promotion of critical thinking, essentially trying to teach his people self-reliance. Honestly, at least at first, I believe Ubtao enjoyed, to some extent, helping the people along their path. But it was a precarious path, and after a time, that line got harder and harder to walk. But with that being said, let's get back to the history. While creating the land of Chult, it's believed that through the act of creation, Ubtao was drawn away from his people. After all, it's pretty busy work creating an entirely new landmass all on your own. Supposedly, Ubtao would attempt to rectify that by splintering his being into several different aspects, or the different spirits of nature and the land, with the biggest part of his being becoming the essence of the Chultan jungle itself. This would also have other consequences, such as the creation of the demigod called the Shadow Giant. Essentially the antithesis of Ubtao, acting as his dark shadow, always in opposition to him, but interestingly enough, never being perceived by him either. But I think that's probably a tale for another time. As I mentioned before, Ubtao would split himself into different aspects to help with his work. He would also go on to raise the city of Mezro up from the ground with the temple of Ubtao sitting neatly at the very center. Ubtao himself would, after his work was mostly done, sit in the temple and tend to his people. The Tabaxi people believed that he had created the city for them, so they always had access to their god, which is, frankly, an unprecedented amount of access to a being so powerful. So as the centuries and millennia wore on, Ubtao would continue assisting his flock to the extent he saw fit. To be clear, I'm compressing quite a bit of time here. This wasn't over the course of decades or even several lifetimes for people like us. This status quo carried on for quite some time, but eventually, it appears as though that tightrope he was walking finally came to an end, because one day, Ubtao simply left. It's unclear to me what the tipping point was. Did he eventually lose faith in his creations? Was it a form of divine disappointment? Or was it something more akin to divine restraint? Either way, Ubtao was simply gone. And then afterwards, the silence. After this incident, Ubtao's influence ceased to be felt among his Chultan followers. It's interesting, at least to me, because this would essentially be a death sentence to most gods in our universe. As we know from previous entries, the gods you and I pray to, those prayers aren't simply prayers. They're a form of divine sustenance for the deities. If a god can no longer have worshippers praying to it, that god will simply wither away and die. In fact, there are several gods floating in the astral sea as a result of just this. Which reminds me, I think I'll have to make an entry on that very topic. It's not something one thinks about very often, but it's true. There exist dead gods floating in the space between spaces. But back to our topic. After walking away from Mezro sometime before 1400 DR, many events took place. Events that I'm sure made the followers of Ubtao wish he was still present in their lives. Everything from the fracturing of the peninsula, the spell plague, and even the rise of the undead. So the jungle grew thicker, and their god felt further away than ever before. Yet Ubtao remained absent. And I think that's where I'll end the history lesson, but let's talk a little bit about why this all happened. Why would Ubtao, a god who seemingly loved his people enough to live among them, simply leave one day and never return? Was it actually abandonment? After all, what else would you call a god leaving when his people depended on him so much? Chult did suffer as a result, and isn't divine silence basically indistinguishable from absence and abandonment? Or was it something closer to his heart? Remember when I briefly talked about what Ubtao stood for? Stoic wisdom and self-reliance? The forging of one's own path through the maze of life. After all, true growth requires struggle, doesn't it? Is it possible that Ubtao truly believed above all else that the independence of his people was sacred? We know that the people of Mezro would come and ask him to solve their problems day in and day out. And for a god with his set of beliefs, I imagine that must have felt like a betrayal of his doctrine. Well, we may never know the actual truth behind it all. This is just one ex-adventurer posing a question to his students. The truth is, at least in Chult, Ubtao does still have his followers. Not as much as there used to be, but they are still there. His divine philosophy of perseverance lives on in the culture. And the dinosaurs still roam, and the maze still endures, waiting for his people to find their way. Perhaps Ubtao did not abandon his people. Perhaps he simply wished them to be strong on their own terms. And if that's true, I think there's something wonderful in that. Thanks for listening. As you can probably tell, I had a bit of fun with this one. I hope you guys enjoyed a bit of a deeper look at the lore of the realms. So if you had fun or if I made you think a bit harder about life, I'd love it if you hit that subscribe button. I'm gonna end this one here. Hopefully I'll see you all for the next one. So be safe, take care, and happy trails.